Hello, and thank you for joining me. In this lesson, we're going to be reading in Luke chapter 14, verses 12 through 14, and considering specifically some things Jesus said to a Pharisee in verse 14. Luke chapter 14, we'll be reading verses 12, 13, and 14. This lesson is a companion to the lesson I recently posted about the spiritual condition of the rich young ruler. Now, our honest investigation of that subject um, showed us that the Bible actually demonstrates, gives evidence that, in fact, let me say, it led us to the unavoidable conclusion that the rich young ruler was an eternally saved individual. He lacked assurance of his eternal salvation. Let me say that the possession of eternal salvation does not guarantee one will have an assurance of it. Many who are saved lack assurance because of wrong religious teachings that they have received. So the rich young ruler's legalistic religion played a huge role in his lack of assurance. And by the way, he wasn't saved because of his religion, he was saved in spite of it, right? Ultimately, his problem was that he lacked confidence in God. Now, historically, many Christians have simply assumed the rich ruler was an unsaved man. And the key word here is assume. Because of assumptions, many are blind to and just read over those key words that we read, and you shall have treasure in heaven. Now, this assumption about the eternal spiritual condition of the rich ruler is in line with the common assumption that most people of whom we read in the Bible, and especially those who had a problem with Jesus, the assumption is, well, they were all just unsaved people. Many simply assume that all the Pharisees were unsaved based upon the fact that they had a problem with Jesus and his teachings. So we're going to investigate this and some questions to kind of preface where we're going. Is it possible some of the Pharisees were eternally saved men? Let's take it a little further. Is it possible many of the Pharisees were eternally saved? They certainly seem to have a zeal for God, although, as we know, it was not according to knowledge, which leads to this question. Is it possible for an eternally saved person to have incorrect religious beliefs and practices? Well, man, it's not only possible, but it's a common thing. So this sets the stage for some things that Jesus said to a chief Pharisee. Now, let's just read our text in verses 12, Luke chapter 14, verse 12. Then he, this is Jesus, also said to him who invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. And here are the critical words: for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. You shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just, the resurrection of the righteous ones. In Luke chapter 14, we have the record of an occasion when Jesus was invited to eat at the house of a chief Pharisee. This is one of the head dudes, right? The Pharisees, they didn't invite Jesus because they liked him. They had set a trap for him. It was the Sabbath day, and they had placed across the table from Jesus a man who had the dropsy. He had a fluid retention problem, right? This man would have been bloated. He probably would have been pretty sweaty. So, kind of a nasty deal. The Pharisees, this was a setup. The Pharisees hoped that Jesus would heal the man. Don't you find it interesting? They had no issue whether or not Jesus could heal. Would he heal? Now, for Jesus to heal someone on the Sabbath, that would violate rabbinical teaching. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to charge Jesus with doing work on the Sabbath day. So Jesus healed the man, and he answered the religious lawyers and Pharisees who had tried to set him up. He asked a question, which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? That was kind of like a no-brainer, right? You got your axe, your your ox or your donkey in the ditch. It doesn't matter the Sabbath day, man. You need to go get it out of there. Verse 6 says they could not answer him regarding these things. Again, it was a no-brainer. And so the point, how much more appropriate to free a man, to heal a man of his illness on the Sabbath day. Now, the Lord went on to expose some practices of the Pharisees. One was their exclusivism. I practiced that word. Exclusivism. There we go. The Pharisees hung out together, and they shut out those who needed their help, those that they considered sinners and below them. So again, we've read in verses 12 through 14, Jesus addressed these words directly. Now, he said also to him who invited him. Let me just read them again, okay? When you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. Now, we don't want to miss the principle involved here. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. And I called your attention, asked you to underline these words, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Okay, so again, Jesus addressed these words directly to the chief Pharisee who had invited him to eat at his house. So when you give a feast, when you make a barbecue, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind. The spiritual principle is don't shut these people off from your help. Now, and again, these people, they represent the social and religious outcasts whom the religious Pharisees had pretty much abandoned them. But these were the people who needed the Pharisees' help. Pharisees were supposed to help them by providing teaching and spiritual help to these people. Now, again, verse 14, we want to notice very carefully, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, they can't reciprocate. And here's the key statement, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. This is the resurrection of the saved, the resurrection of the righteous. In John chapter 5 and verse 29, Jesus said, there is a resurrection of life for the saved, and then there is a resurrection of condemnation for those who refuse to accept God's gracious offer of salvation. Now, we come to use some simple reasoning again as we did in that lesson on the rich young ruler. First of all, if the chief Pharisee was an unsaved man, I mean, people naturally they just assume that he was an unsaved man. But let's walk this through. If the chief Pharisee was an unsaved man and he did what Jesus told him to do, would his actions, would his works result in him becoming eternally saved? Well, absolutely not. And this would result or amount to a works-based salvation. Okay, next question then. Did Jesus tell this man how to be saved? Well, no, he didn't. We don't find that anywhere. Did Jesus lie to him? Well, no, Jesus didn't lie to him. If the chief Pharisee was an unsaved man and he followed the Lord's instructions but never trusted God to forgive his sins and save him, would he be at the resurrection of the righteous? The answer to that question also is no, he would not be there. So, what I want us to see, what I want us to get, the Lord would not have spoken these words to an unsaved man. Thus, again, we have evidence that leads us to another unavoidable conclusion. The chief Pharisee was already an eternally saved man. Look, we can't make it work any other way. So here we have proof, we have evidence that at least one Pharisee was an eternally saved individual. Now, should we think that he was an exception? I don't think so. Thus, we have to hold out the possibility. In fact, I think the probability is that many of the Pharisees were saved men. They just had some things wrong. Well, listen, I've had some things wrong. You've had some things wrong. We don't have everything right. I can make a strong case that the Pharisee Nicodemus was an already saved man when we read of him coming to Jesus by night in John chapter 3. He was a saved man. I can make that case. I can make a case that Saul of Tarsus was an already saved man before his Damascus Road encounter with the risen Jesus. And again, if someone asked you how to be saved, you wouldn't take them to Acts chapter 9 and use Saul's experience as an example of how to be saved. You say, well, why not? There's nothing there about how to receive eternal salvation. Okay, so what's the value of this study? Well, it can cause us to start questioning long held assumptions and presuppositions. Brethren, look, we we tend to have a lot of baggage that we bring, a lot of background, religious background that we bring to our study of the Bible, and it has a tendency to cloud what we see. Um, Ultimately, our study can help shape our perspective on the Bible and help us to see things that otherwise, because of presupposition, pre-understanding, that we might miss. Now, I'll leave you with an illustration. Some of you have read this in my book or you've heard it. For Christmas a couple of years ago, I bought my wife a new easy chair. And so the way it worked, I said, well, you go down, you find a chair that you like. Here's how much money we're going to spend. So you pick out your own chair. So she was shopping for her chair, and she she sent on my phone. She sent a picture to my phone. She said, "Man, I found it. I love this chair. What do you think?" And so I remember looking at the picture. It was kind of I don't know, it was kind of a subtle green, a really, really beautiful chair. And okay, go ahead and get it. And we had it delivered. All right, so the delivery people came and brought the chair in, and Lori saw it as soon as they took the wrapping off of it. She said, "That's not the chair that I chose." I said, "Well, why not?" Well, we looked at the chair and it was a brown color. It was still an attractive chair, but it wasn't that subtle green that she had showed me she saw in the store. And so, started asking questions. What's going on here? Have you substituted the chair? Anyway, long story short, what happened is that under the artificial lighting in the store, the chair was that subtle green color. The color of the chair never changed. When it got to the house and we had this natural light coming into the room, then we were able to see the true color of the chair, and it was the brown. So as I said, the color of the chair didn't change. The issue was it was the lighting. It was the way that we viewed the chair. So I think that's a wonderful illustration that sometimes we can, because of religious background and assumptions and presuppositions, pre-understanding, we can view the Bible, let's say, in an artificial light, right? But what we want to do, what we have to strive to do, and these lessons are part of that. We have to strive to see the Bible in a true light and to see what is truly there. And so there's a wonderful value to that, and we can come to have a whole new perspective on the Bible and how we view it. So once again, thank you for joining me, and I hope you find these lessons helpful. I like to say, if you've not subscribed to my channel, please do hit that little red subscribe button. It should be there on your screen. If you like these lessons, hit the like button. And if you have questions, I check the comments. Not always, but I check the comments from time to time. You can add some comments, ask a question, or you can email me at I'm trying to remember my email address. Well, I better not give it to you because I can't remember exactly what it is right now. But anyway, next lesson I'll share that with you. So thank you for joining me, and the Lord bless you richly.